Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. As was mentioned, we are here to talk about simplifying your security stack. Are those slides coming up? No, they're not on there. They're on here.
There we go.
There we go. All right. I'm no surprise to anyone. Continued super mega growth within cyber. This is just one chart, but it continues to really grow. And I don't know if anyone actually attended RSA this past June. If you went on the demo floor, there were probably more vendors than I've ever seen. I think they had the largest capacity of vendors providing products there. They had to go to both sides and in the middle and squeeze them in everywhere. There wasn't a open space for anybody. What that means, though, is that there are tons and tons and tons of products out there. And you then take a look at those products and say, which one do I pick? I've got so many different vendors, so many different possibilities, so many duplicative efforts related to helping me in my security stack that I'm not sure which way to go. And there are some really good products out there. And a lot of those products join with other products and they become even better products. But at the end of the day, as you continue to evolve, there's just more and more and more out there. Are they really providing you the benefit you need for the cost that you're looking at? So when you look at tool sprawl, which is really the next big problem, you have a series of people that you've been entrenched with for decades. You've used their products. They've evolved their products. Sometimes they haven't evolved their products, but they're an entrenched vendor, and you continue to use that product because they have the contract, et cetera. There's a lot of silos of tools. They don't necessarily talk well to each other. They like to try to say they do, but when it comes down to implementing them, they don't necessarily talk well, or there's a lot of different kind of band-aids you have to put to make them talk well together. It's confusing for security operations, right? Which tool do I look at for which situation, in what environment, in one place? And all of a sudden, your security operation people are overwhelmed in trying to look at everything that they need to look at. The data problem. You've got massive amounts of information being fed from all of these different data tools into your SOC or into your SIM, and you don't know what to really look at. And as I mentioned, overworked staff, there are so many different interfaces. Do they bring up this? Do they bring up that? Who has access to bring up this? Who has access to bring up that? And it really is a big problem. When you look at that, this fractional environment really increases your attack surface because you don't really have one easy place by which to look at your entire environment. There's also a high total cost of ownership. When you look at the amount of licenses being spent per user on a lot of these tools, or fragments, you have 100 users on this tool and 200 on that, or 1,000 on this, all of a sudden you have these really increasing costs. And a lot of times some of these are just sitting shelfware. Someone bought them in a certain division or a certain business unit, and now you have basically dead dollars sitting in your portfolio. There's obviously increased administration and support costs related to that. There's even the whole process of patching these tools themselves in making sure that they're up to date from security vulnerabilities. And so that whole process becomes very complicated, and it makes it very difficult to manage.
Yeah, so I would like to switch gears a little bit. We're talking about the tool sprawl, all these different tools, and consider the smartphone, right? I don't know about you, but the last time I took a digital SLR on vacation, I think it was when I went to Hawaii and I took a jillion sunset photos. I probably just gotten those off the internet because they all looked pretty well the same. But you think about all the products that the smartphone has replaced, and we all remember the all-in-one printers and how horrible those were originally, and they were the does nothing well printers. And now they've gotten pretty good. And the smartphone kind of same. It's replaced the calculator and PDA, if you remember those right? So many tools into a single platform. And ultimately, having integrated platforms that are permitting common access models and data sharing will always trump best of breed ubiquity. Because yes, a DSLR will take better photos than most smartphones, but then how do I get them from here to there? And then you're like, shuffling back and forth, you're taking cables on vacation, et cetera. And ultimately, integrated platforms at the end of the day win. And so how do we take lessons from this into security? And next slide there. So I would say that perhaps just like we could say that buying a whole series of things to carry on your vacation, or buying a separate scanner, printer, copier, et cetera, for your home, that the era of best of breed, I think, may be coming to an end. And shifting from the best of breed model, where you have comfortable logos and platforms, there's trust in these comfortable logos that you've been working with the vendors for a long time. And the best of breed would seek the A players, of course, best of breed, right? You're not going for the C's, you're going for the A's. And I would look at what abilities there are at major cloud vendors and integrated solutions, and having a policy-based cloud model shifts you from the focus on logos to focuses on outcomes and capabilities. And maybe you would say, like, I don't necessarily have to have an A player for every single tool. Having a bunch of B tools all work together, still pretty good. And I would contend that a lot of the cloud platforms are no longer B players. In fact, some of them are coming out on top and truly are best of game, best of breed themselves, even though they are integrated. With a best of breed model, you have silos, siloed data. If you've gone into your SOC, you'll see many times that your SOC analyst will have 8, 9, 10 tools up. Answering the question, how many devices do you have in your environment? Well, one tool tells me this, another one tells me that. They're all different numbers, really hard to know, because siloed data doesn't work together. Where if you have policy-based enforcement in a cloud-based integrated model with open data, that starts to make a lot of sense, much in the same way that the smartphone makes a lot of sense. We've also, next slide there, we've also taken note of Microsoft's unique security position. Now, if your business applications are hosted in AWS, all of this still applies, right? And it used to be that you would look at a cloud-based, say, EDR platform that's doing data sharing. It's like, wow, you see millions of events. Yeah, how about billions of events? Google Cloud, AWS, and Microsoft are seeing billions, perhaps trillions of attacks over time. And the numbers are just staggering. So the visibility to the attacks, the investments that are being made, it's really staggering. And Microsoft invests $1 billion a year in security. That's a heck of a lot. So there's really a unique position there that we think Microsoft occupies in the market. And just going to pivot to talk about why we think that kind of makes sense to look at it in that way.
Let me ask a question of the audience just by raising your hands. How many people have in their organization adopted Office 365 or M365? Using Teams, most likely, or
almost
some
every
derivative,
hand
right?
For those of you online.
We all went remote working in that regards, and so everyone was now on their remote laptop, etc. Well, all of a sudden, the traditional models have gone away. You've got an environment in a unique ecosystem that's predominantly Microsoft-based, even if you are using AWS or Google. And so there's a lot of advantages to looking at what Microsoft has within its capabilities. And I won't drain through all of those tools, but if you look at all of the things on there, and if someone would go and take a little red check mark right now, you probably would say, hey, I'm using this, I'm using that, I'm using this, I'm using that. And all of a sudden it says, how do I bring that all together? Because I'm using so many different things within that. And as Dan mentioned, the amount of investment that they've made in integrating these from a security, the security is first and foremost now in a lot of the development related to these tools. They're also evolving that in integrating them more tightly and allowing them, an event to happen. As an example, if I see something happening within your Outlook, I can make a change to what I'm permitting you to do within Teams and things of that nature. So there's a lot of integration that's occurring within that. So look at this complexity. This is their cybersecurity reference architecture. It looks very complex, but when you break it down, there's really a number of major components to this. There's the Cyber Operations Center, Security Operations Center. There is the software as a service. There's endpoint management and devices. There's obviously hybrid infrastructure. Doesn't matter if you're on Azure or AWS or the like. You've got information protection, and then you have identity around identity and access around Azure AD and probably on-prem AD. Within that complexity of this slide, there are integration points that allow these tools to be effectively used and help you manage your security environment a lot easier and a lot more simple. So here's just a quick view of some of the security tools that they offer. When we go in and talk with clients right now, we ask them in these pillars, what are you using for this? And inevitably, we get a hodgepodge of answers related to the tools they're using. When you look at how you break that down into, have you looked at using this solution? They're like, oh, we never even knew that capability existed, or we didn't know that functionality would be provided. And when you take that and compare that to the tool they're using and the function that they can get out of something they already have and the risk that they're reducing, there's a lot of advantages in their adoption. We call it kind of a zero-based portfolio management kind of component. And they really look at saying, I can take advantage of something I already have and own and is integrated and simplify my entire operation.
All right, so let's talk about how to get started, how to build a business case for your security modernization journey with that strategic planning. Our recommended approach that we utilize and we kind of want to present to you today, first off, if you don't know where you are, you can't navigate to where you want to go, right? It's celestial navigation. So you have to understand where you are and validate your current state, understand what you really have invested in, et cetera. Make sure you're using the right technology mix. Many organizations will find when they go through this and validate the current state and validate their technology mix that they have many things, tools to do the same thing. I was engaged with a corporation here recently, and they had 12 collaboration tools. 12. That's a little nutty, right? Because you know, and I'm not dissing any of them, but you know, you have Teams and Zoom and GoToMeeting and on and on and on. 12. That's a lot of waste. Because you look at the list and go, why? Right? And then plan for cloud zero trust. We think if you're going to make this kind of investment, you might as well see if you can make that move at the same time. Then analyze the total cost of ownership opportunities. You really need to look at the licensing that you have in place, the sequencing of that, and just determine the total cost of ownership as well as transitioning, and then help define the transformational roadmap, and then onto your business case. So as validation of the current state, again, like celestial navigation, where am I? You have to know. And understand this current security portfolio typically requires collaboration with finance and accounting and contract management, so you can understand the cycles that you have across the different relationships that you have. You may be leasing or purchases, et cetera, and when do those licenses expire? And so you need to look at the contracts you have and those licensing renewal cycles, and also do some budgetary analysis. So there is some number crunching into it. And you should be able to quickly find some dead dollars in the portfolio. I spent a number of years as a security architect, and one day went to my CISO and said, hey, we've been hacked for $8 million. He's like, what? Oh yeah. Because remember that thing you bought that sat on the loading dock for 2 years and we never did anything with it? Yeah, you had a PO hack on your organization that took $8 million out for which you got no value. You were hacked for $8 million. Not very pretty. He was like, oh, you're kind of right, but yeah. So think about it that way. If you had dead dollars in your portfolio, you're kind of being hacked by vendors, or at least by your own execution of the platforms you're buying. So you need to deduplicate your products and look for overlapping feature sets. Perhaps you needed the one tool, but you bought the super duper deluxe enterprise edition that included all the things, and it overlaps with like 6 other tools you already have. Look for some gold-plated products with unused features. Frequently you'll find those, or known gaps in portfolio. You might find you have 6 things, 6 SIMs essentially, or 6 vulnerability management solutions, but nothing doing another function in your organization that's missing. So that's important to validate that, and then do some application rationalization. What do we really need? What are you trying to achieve? And this is where you need to really break the logo fixation. I was working with a CISO a while ago, and they were going to AWS for their platforms. And like I said, this is true across Microsoft, AWS, Google Cloud, major cloud providers. A lot of this is the same discussion. And he was convinced that you absolutely had to have his favorite EDR that he loved so much. And you had to have the vulnerability management solution he loved so much. They were trying to do microservices. CISO comes along and says, I have to have these two platforms, therefore you must build Linux servers. They're trying to do elastic compute where they're going to stand them up and tear them down, and they're going to live for like 9 seconds max. And now you're forcing an infrastructure as a service solution just because he had fallen in love with logos. So you have to watch that. You have to look at the technical debt that you have in the organization and break away from the I trust this vendor, I love this vendor kind of relationship to truly what capabilities do I need? What do I need to have as far as my outcomes for the business and the security program? What are my requirements? And you'll see where you can find that across your portfolio. And then try as well to shift processing from the edge of the data center, obviously, to the cloud. And this is another area of technical debt. I was talking with a CISO recently, and they actually had laptops catching on fire because they were running so many agents for the security stack. They'd actually had to double the compute power and get extra processors, and it was running so hot just doing the security stuff on the edge, they were catching on fire. That's a little extreme. And shifting that to a centralized policy-based model in the cloud, much better solution in that point. Plan for cloud zero trust. Now's the time to make the move to zero trust if you haven't already, and look for cloud-enabled AI platforms. Look for security infrastructure as code and truly into DevSecOps. It's time to maybe shift towards passwordless and enable that via the cloud. And conditional access models that allow you to do pinning and geographic processing and get to threat detection of sessions, et cetera. There's a lot you can actually accomplish by truly utilizing the power of the cloud compute.
Well, 1 second, Dan, and just
Sure.
interrupt. Go back to that slide.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, a lot of people think zero trust is a tool. It is not a tool. It's a principle. It is
Yes.
made up, and I just want to point that out because I don't think we did on the slide, that it is the concept of zero trust and how do you implement the platform to enable that principle. It is not something you can just plug in and say, now I have zero trust in that regard. So
Yes.
just want to point that out.
Or sprinkle like pixie dust over the top.
Correct.
Yes. Doesn't work that way. Right. Yeah. And then the TCO What-if Analysis, figuring out how much do I move and what platforms do I go to? What are my transitional costs? And understand if this is big bang and you can walk away from your licenses because you can actually get there with your financial model, or is it going to be a license roll-off and a tapering? You might have leasing and capitalization issues to deal with. You'll get great help from your finance folks to cover all of that. And also determine the dependencies, like what components need to move together, that you don't really want to break those apart. And in the process, now you've actually doubled down and you're doing duplicate stacks. So figure out what logically should move together, and then try to model those and understand the transition projects for that, because there will be a cost. You never get to move from one platform to another for free, right? There will be a transition cost, and understand that cost of switching and build that into the TCO model. That's pretty important. And then a transformational roadmap. This will sound like technology transformation. This is really cultural transformation. It is culture change. So make sure you consider organizational change management as part of this. Make sure you're considering documentation and training, the staffing required. You're going to have some folks that will be pretty uncomfortable with a cloud-based model. You might actually lose some really good staff, and hopefully you'll pick up some really good staff. Some folks are very resistant to change. So organizational change management and culture change is hard. This is a transformation project, so make sure you're taking that into account and approaching it as a transformation project, not as a technical project, right? There is technology in place, but it's a lot broader than that. And so calculate that into that transformational roadmap for what happens when, and then the cost of that, and then build that business case. Figure out who your champions, figure out who your detractors, right? What's the phrase? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. Was that Godfather phrase, right? Bring those detractors on board. Like, they may have a critical opinion. So figure out who those folks are, find out your champions, find out your sponsors, make sure you're talking about the total cost of ownership, risk-adjusted return on capital and ROI, and the true benefits of this. And we think there's a pretty solid case for break even many times. And in fact, we've seen, and Jessica can talk about in just a second, with some of our case studies. But make sure you create a shared vision for that transformational change. This is what life will be like afterwards. And I'll be able to tell you how many boxes we have, not just guess. And we'll have these integrated platforms. And our SOC should be able to run with maybe fewer staff or do a better job. You can actually do threat hunting and more valuable work than paying a bunch of folks to create APIs to shove data back and forth because your stack doesn't talk to each other. That's kind of a bleak existence when you get right down to it. So you're really getting into more meaningful work, and it's part of that shared vision model to talk about. So Jeff, why don't you talk through some of the case studies that we have where we've seen this with our clients.
Yep, thank you. So in this case, we had a global hotel group. They were looking, if you look at their business situation, they really had 4 items that they were looking to. Of course, reduce risk, increase their employee productivity, optimize their total cost of ownership, and develop it as they had a more strategic relationship with Microsoft. And what we looked at when we went through this implementation and transformation was what they're currently using within their modern workplace, and what capabilities they had and how those would integrate, and how that shift from best of breed was going to increase. And I asked the question before, how many people have gone to O365 or M365 in some cases? How were they going to capitalize on that overall? We developed a 3-year kind of an application adoption roadmap. As Dan mentioned just before, what was that user experience going to be like? What was the change management going to be like in that process? And how were we making sure that they were going to achieve their desired benefits that we've mentioned in the left column there? As a result, they really went and adopted and created a series of what-if analysis. They looked at what happens when I change this, what happens to the user experience, how am I going to make sure I make that transition pretty smooth, am I making sure I'm reducing my security risk overall. And as part of that, it was a collaboration between the client, Microsoft, and Avanade in making sure that that whole journey and that transition was quite well received. All right. Very similar situation here on a leading insurer. I didn't have a case study I'll talk about another client in a second from an identity provider shift. But this also was an M365 E3 license. If you're not familiar with the licensing schemes in Microsoft, there's a couple of sites out there that will tell you all the tools that are part of it. Most common is E3 to E5. And when you make that move, there's a whole series of tools that are available from that technology stack. They wanted to understand what that journey would look like if they were going to move from an E3 license to an E5 license. And they also wanted to make sure that they understood the benefits of standardizing on that best of platform and moving to that Microsoft stack. What we did was we did a bunch of modeling of some of the products within the stack, helping them understand how they compared to the third-party products that they're currently using, how they would work, what can be replaced, what features and functions they would get that weren't existing today, what things they may lose, and what was going to be the plan. And this is, again, collaboration with Microsoft. They're very good about listening to clients that say, I need to have this. And they hear it from this client, and then the second client and the third client, guess what? They're building it into their roadmap. And so there's a lot of evolution with their continued investment. It's not just take this and goodbye and we're done. We obviously, from over that, again, created the roadmap, the transformational roadmap over 3 years. It does take time. It's not something you can just flip the switch. It takes, as I mentioned, we're going through a client right now that's removing Okta in place of Azure AD. That identity provider shift on 270 apps takes time. You've got to coordinate with those app owners. You got to coordinate with the business. You got to minimize. You got to look at timeout periods, right? We didn't want to switch the benefits app during benefits enrollment here in November. From a timing perspective.
That's how you really hack off HR. You don't. No, you don't do that.
So that's part of that transformational roadmap you need to look at. But at the end of the day, they got significant TCO reduction. They were able to actually implement a lot of the security products in a better way and increase their collaboration capabilities.
Yeah, so as part of this journey, we do an application roadmap analysis. Like we were laying out the steps for you to actually execute this for yourself. So as we engage with these clients, we look at the different applications they have, and there may be some really good reasons not to move off of some of these. You know, like we had a major hotel firm was one of those, and obviously they have premises, right? They're not operating in the cloud. They have they have an actual facility, and sometimes those facilities actually require embedded equipment, and for them it might make sense. Or retailers with brick and mortar as well as click and mortar. You know, you're not going to talk to somebody about the 2,200 stores they have and getting away from some of the embedded models they have to have, right? So some of those actually do make sense. You have to do the application rationalization. What stays, what goes, what stays for a period of time, and then gets replaced later. And through the application rationalization process and looking at the health that you have, understanding where you are and the investments you have, quite frequently we'll find some health issues with some of those applications. Like, oh, this one's going to stay, but it needs help. Like, you know, there's maybe some real issues with it being on bad infrastructure, or like your support staff aren't trained appropriately. They need to really tool up. So it's not all replace, right? But you have to understand and rationalize what stays, what goes, what can be blended together, what you already perhaps own, like Jeff was saying with Microsoft E5. Hey, you already have Sentinel, and it's like best of breed, but it's not best of breed, it's cloud. Why are you using a different SIM when you're already paying for one? Just like roll. And you know, why install a SIM into the cloud that already has one you've already paid for, right? Doesn't quite make sense when you think it through like that. And then what we will then do is develop a roadmap. So next slide there. Oh,
Oops, sorry.
right here. And then that roadmap then. So you know, some people are visual, some people want to see the numbers and everything else. So you know, present it like that, and be able to talk about the sequencing and what is complex and what moves together. You know, what's the low-hanging fruit that you can bang out pretty quickly? What's going to take a lot of expense because it's very tightly coupled, or you know, other reasons. And you have to really understand the costs of moving along with this and create that kind of transformational roadmap to be able to talk about that plan.
So one thing in the roadmap is very important when you're looking at this best of platform is those foundational elements. And making sure you lay those down. We had a client recently that said, hey, we want to do very rapid Teams pilot. We want to get rid of our collaboration program and go to Teams. Well, guess what? They still had all on-prem AD. They hadn't synced to Azure Active Directory. And, oh, by the way, they had 26 on-prem Active Directory trees. Well, we weren't going to be able to rapidly go to a Teams pilot without at least getting some of that synchronization looked at. And when we did the analysis in the roadmap, it wasn't that complex. There was one primary forest we could do that, and we laid that out as an implementation component for the work stream, but it's foundational, and that enables all of the other components around it. So when you do lay the roadmap out, you do have to look at the foundational elements.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are obviously sequences that you have to kind of follow because of those kind of things, cleanup perhaps that has to happen in advance. And then for the TCO analysis that we do, you know, we're looking at, you know, cost of switching and that transitional cost. You know, in the prior case we're looking at there, it was a 5-year ROI of 23.5%. And they were able to take their TCO, had to tweak the numbers a little bit, you know, we don't tell people who our clients are, but in rough numbers, able to go from 78.4 million spend on their security stack to 66.7. So pretty big savings there. They're able to take 14 applications off the stack and get rid of those. And they had some cutover costs. I mean, those not for free, that you don't get to move that, but they were able to actually achieve pretty significant cost savings, as well as a tighter relationship with Microsoft to really leverage the relationship they had with them. and increase security to boot.
Just another comment to that. One thing that we didn't bring out in that TCO slide, they were able to shift their already kind of scarce resources, overworked resources, to more high priority items. They were able to take the people that they had, give them different responsibilities, things that these people wanted to be doing, and allow them to spend their time better, focused more on the business risk for the organization without having to worry about managing the tools themselves.
Right, because there was a lot of care and feeding you can take off the table at that point. And so an example of a 3-year secure modern workplace roadmap that we've done, is being able to talk about that transitional state and talk about how it is, again, moving forward, that you can get these sequences of things taken care of and then, move on down the road. So this is, the telling and selling of this with your the strategy model in collaboration with perhaps enterprise architecture, business strategy, finance, be able to talk about those sequences that you're going to move through to achieve that final state. But there are soft benefits as well. Jeff, you want to talk about a few of those?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, kind of the worker productivity gain, number one, there's the quicker access to the content and information they need to make decisions. They've got reduced kind of communication. They have kind of a more single pane of glass to take a look at. They increase their overall mobile productivity. They can check things in different places. They don't have to be on a laptop in that regards. They can do reduced kind of app switching. What apps are integrated into the platform overall. And so there's just an overall worker productivity gain. And then more importantly, and this is one of the number one things we're seeing now in people in their transition, is my employee experience, my user experience. And we'll talk a little bit about it, but users hate to have to enter their password 52 times. They hate to have to go to this system requires this system requires that. And so you increase your user experience, you increase your employee satisfaction or your contractors or your vendors, and it makes it a lot easier from that perspective. And so those are, we talked about TCO, but these two areas of a better user experience and worker productivity really help quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, actual measured employee satisfaction, working with organizational change management, the ability to move that in a positive direction, because you're really getting to more meaningful work. You're no longer doing the carrying and feeding of your tool stack. Now you're executing mission. And that feels a whole lot different at the end of the day. So some of the results that we were able to see, a clear benefit at reducing the duplication and streamlining operations, reducing waste. And like we said, employee satisfaction and increased retention. And then a productivity increase with DevSecOps, being able to, instead of clicking on things and configuring, now you're actually doing infrastructure as code, wash, rinse, repeat, improving that process, stepwise refinement over time, driving further value. Reduced dwell time. You're seeing things faster, you're responding faster, you're not being able to pull information out of your tools to be able to synthesize it, make sense of it, hours or days later. Is policy-based enforcement at the point of execution. That is huge. A better visibility to events and behaviors, because you're actually able to see those through an integrated platform, so things pop out easier. And we're also seeing substantive ROI with our clients.
Another example we have recently with a client, how many people here take annual security awareness training, kind of required, right? Well, what about real-time security awareness training? What I mean by real-time, thank you. Real-time security awareness training is, normal phishing exercises and the like, but they're much more integrated. Where if someone clicks on something, it automatically has a behavior, and it takes them right into a little gamified training exercise, and you get scores throughout the year. There's prizes at the end of the year for your scores. And it becomes real time, and that becomes integrated within that platform, because we're able to capitalize on the M365 and Outlook and behavior analysis and Defender and SIM or Sentinel, and bring that all together to do kind of real time, event analysis and real time training.
So how do we turn this into action, Jeff? What can this group do going back to work to make this happen in their organization?
Yep. So I think one thing is really look at what your platform looks like. What are the technologies and tools you have in place? How many different vendors do you have? What's the state of those vendors? Look at where you have shelfware or dead dollars, as we said. Look at those things and say, we're not really using this, or we're only using it for some small percentage of the population that I'm really trying to look at. And really determine what does that look like. Understand, if you can, your M365 license. What do you have? What capabilities do you have available to you with the licensing you have? And what would be the consideration when you look at that model of, if I switch my license, what would that mean for me? You can really look at your security portfolio and the capabilities and objectives you have. Again, bring that a little bit back to risk. Is what is that tool giving me to protect my risk that something in the Microsoft stack couldn't help me with?
Right. And also map this as well, not just like, we talk about why Microsoft, we think there's a nice play there because of O365 and the familiar platforms you already have. It's much easier to train, but if your business is standardized on AWS, like I had a discussion with a CISO about this, he's like, well, yeah, but if I do that, I have to do it in 2 places. Well, yeah, but you're doing it in 5 now, so that's actually a lot better. Yeah, and then you can have the discussion of, do they want hybrid cloud and do the security stack in 2 places like that, or do you want to be able to bring that data into your other cloud and execute in one? And there's some of the decisions there, but ultimately 2 places is much better than 5, 6, 7, whatever it is. And then over the next couple of months, then as you understand what you have and some of the dead dollars you have in your portfolio and exactly what you're operating with, then start working on that TCO model. What-if analysis, talk to finance, figure out the leases that you have, figure out capitalization, depreciation, and all those sorts of fun things, and figure out when it is that you make your best move and what the TCO actually looks like. Start figuring out that roadmap. If we were to make this transformation across the next 3 years, how would we achieve that? What would be the sequencing? Where is the TCO lie? And some what-if analysis of moving a few, moving half, moving all, et cetera, and run those models through and understand what that actually looks like. And make sure that you look at this as business transformation. It's not tool transformation, it's business transformation. And that is disruptive, so make sure you don't ignore that. And start kicking the tires with a POC. Try to figure out how this makes sense in your organization if you start shifting some of this to cloud. And then over the next 6 months, you can start that transition to a cloud-first, zero-trust model. That's our prepared remarks. Any questions? Very quiet group.
Well, I, for one, would love to know if you have any specific lines you recommend or how you really kind of sell this to your other stakeholders. I think a lot of us in the room might want this, but how do we convince other people? What are some of those go-to tactics that you can recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of organizations, that analysis of current state, there will be points of pain. And like I talked about, where I have my VM tool tells me I have this many assets. My asset management says a different number, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and points to all of the data shuffling you're doing, the databases you're having to create to ingest data and blow it out to other places. That's a lot of wheel spinning that you're doing because you have silos. So starting with those points of pain can be a great way to say, like, this is why we want to start. This might be worth that journey. And you might very quickly find you already own a lot of tools you're not using. Your licensing may already enable you to make that transition and sunset some expensive tools.
Yeah, and add on to that question too. One of the things that we've looked at is taking it from the business, understanding their points. We hear a lot in working with some healthcare systems right now. We have too many logins. We don't know where to go. We don't know when to log into this. We have to launch this system. And so you say, how can I simplify that? Or I have to call the help desk to reset my password and can argue about getting rid of passwords. But can you have self-service password reset and make the user experience better? Get rid of the pain points at the business level. That's how you make the argument for the journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look at the folks you have on the front lines, right? Talk to your SOC. talk to your engineers. Look for how many times when you look over their shoulder that they're doing drag and drop, cut and paste from one app to another app. They're doing extract and load, and you'll start to see some dead activity there. That it's just like this is tool care and feeding that they've become so used to it seems normal, right? And it's the normalization of broken, right? So you can start to find those, and all of those are inefficiencies, and decrease employee satisfaction ultimately. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. We've got one question here.
So I was wondering, my organization, we have this very fat way of using distribution lists for email. And so I probably receive 100 to 150 emails per day, of which maybe, I don't know, a quarter of those really pertain to something I need to do. The rest of those are delete, 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 delete. And, I work for a rather large organization, and these emails go to everybody. So in the room that I work in, who get, all these people get these emails, we probably have about 200 people. I was wondering if you have been approached by anybody for a solution to streamline that at all. So that, if an email comes in and it's a blast email, is there a site to push that to?
Yeah,
or
so
something?
there's a couple of things. One is how groups are being used and through the identity lifecycle and dynamic groups, et cetera. There is, more importantly, some of the things in the Microsoft stack within Viva and its insights. So Viva is now really that platform that they're using to help reduce email distribution and clutter, also help you to give you an insights. It'll say what you need to focus on. You'll get depending on how your organization adopts it, you'll get a daily email to say, these are the things that seem to be important to you because this is what you were working on yesterday, and it'll highlight those for you. And then based on that, it learns what your focus is and then can filter the things that you don't want to see. So Viva has that capability. And then again, it's an integrated part of the platform. So it has behind it the ability to allow you the right access to your OneDrive, your SharePoint, your Teams, show you where those files are without you having to search and dig. And again, it increases worker productivity in that aspect.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Jeff has a plane to catch, but I'll be hanging around for further questions if you like. And thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.